Do the formula. Okay? You start off, the executor determines the free residue of the estate. The free residue of the estate is after you have collected all the assets, you have paid all the expenses, okay, and you've paid all the creditors. What's left? So he arrives, he sells everything, blah, blah, blah. Then he says, right, from the free residue, you may, what is excluded from the free residue is your retirement funds. Your retirement funds sit outside of your estate. Okay? They're not deemed to be part of your estate, etc. Watching also out for free residue. Included in the free residue is the value of your life insurance. No matter who you leave it to, it's included in the value of your estate. Right. So you take the free residue, and now we have to say what deductions can we pay before we get to a total, on which we will have estate duty at 20%. Right, what can I take out of there? I'm given a basic abatement of 3.5 million, okay, per taxpayer. So if you're below that, there's no estate duty. Okay, your retirement fund is out. So the objective is that there's no free residue, or there is a residue of 3.5 million. The problem with the 3.5 million is it hasn't been revised since 2007. So that is a moderate home today. Okay? So now the question is, I'm going to die. How do I stop it happening? There, I've got two choices. You can take the Rhodes approach. You can go philanthropic, unlimited. Okay? So you can bequeath to an NGO. That is why the SPCA spends a lot of time at old age homes. Okay? They are ambulance chasing. They're saying, your kids have forgotten you here, but not your dog. And you can leave as much as you want there. Stellenbosch University. Every wealthy farmer leaves part of his estate or his art collection or whatever to Stellenbosch University. Why? Doesn't pay estate duty on it. The Rhodes himself left his money for the greater good of the British Empire. Why? Not because he was being kind, he didn't want any estate duties on it. Okay? Leave it to the public good. Right. And there's a lot to be said for that. In fact, if you ever go to Paris and you see the Picasso collections in Paris, they are absolutely magnificent. The French tax authorities grabbed them from his estate and put them into the Paris collections. That's how they got there. But I don't want to give it to Rhodes. I don't want to give it to the dog fund. How do I stop paying estate duty? I say 4Q. Section 4Q of the Estate Duty Act says that you may, in terms of current law, leave as much as you want to your spouse, free of estate duty. So what does the average South African need currently not to pay estate duty? One line in the will: I leave everything to my spouse. Estate duty dealt with. And this leads to mischief, because a spouse is not only a person to whom you are married, but it is also anybody with whom you are in a permanent relationship, heterosexual or homosexual. So, if I'm single and I've got a month to live, I need to find a spouse. So where do I look? www.russianbrides.com. It's a Permanent relationship, I said so in my will. There's very little SARS can do to overturn that. I'm not saying it's impossible. But that's how you get rid of it. Now, is that fair? Well, married people will say, of course that's fair. My wife must finish the family. She needs all the money, and there's a lot to be said for that. But why should a single working mother have an estate duty problem where a married couple with children don't have an estate duty problem? The money is ultimately going to go to the kids. So there is an issue on it. What the Davis Committee has actually suggested is that 4Q be abandoned, and that 3.5 million be increased to 15 million. Every South African doesn't have a wealth tax problem until they're a US dollar millionaire. Okay? And we would lose very little revenue in doing that. We would still catch the big estates, but we would leave the middle working class of South Africa out of the deal. Okay? And we wouldn't have the inconsistent treatment of taxpayers based on their marital status. But that's a big ethical debate that I've been involved in recently. Okay? So that's just to throw in, not examinable. That's just another bit of the story. We now say, right, next up, so tax allowances. We've had expenditure incurred deductible revenue expenses. Now we say, if an expense is capital in nature, it's not deductible under 11A in full. You now have to have the so-called depreciation or wear and tear allowances in the Act. And they are extensive. There's the general deduction formula there. Then under capital expenditure, we have allowances for fixed property, leases, movable property, incorporeal property, fixed property and other allowances, even environmental assets, biofuel assets, business licenses, lessees, goodness knows what else. Now, you don't need to study any of these in any detail. What you have to understand is that each asset has its own set of allowances. And they can be quite complicated to calculate. You will see, I think I included it in the pack, that there is a separate session for small business corporations and the SME sector of South Africa. Now, in this course, you are doing an MBA, therefore you are an intrapreneur, not an entrepreneur, right? You're going to use this qualification in a job. So I've said that this is outside of syllabus for this year's MBA class. I will teach it to the PDEMs who are entrepreneurs. Okay? You guys are going to sit there and say, shit, I'm going to buy some new plant. What tax allowances am I going to get? Well, that is for the accountants, the chief financial officer, the nerd, to inform the board about. You've just got to know that there are allowances there. Ask the question. Then the specialist comes and gives you the advice. Okay, delegate the problem. You will never know it all. Okay, we spent years doing this. So all the stuff on SBC, tax rates and all the rest of it, there is a video there and how that all works, but it is outside of scope for the MBA because you are entrepreneurs, not entrepreneurs. Then we have all the commercial building allowances. We have special allowances for residential buildings and residential urban development zones and UDZs and all the rest of it. But you don't have to get involved in it. Moving on from there, we get to provisional tax. When does a company pay its tax? You pay tax on a monthly basis on your salaries. That is employees' tax. A business pays on what's called the provisional tax cycle. Now, the provisional tax cycle, I think we better go back to the board. Let me illustrate this for you. There's not a slide there. Right. Where is the pen again? Provisional tax you can get into a whole load of shit about. A huge penalty for just skipping Not what you declared, but when you paid it. Right. We have a tax year. What is the South African tax year? 1st of March to the 28th of February. Okay, so that's 1/3 to 28/2. But a company is entitled to use any year-end date it wants. Many use March, many use June, and some use December. Okay, now, what happens with tax is that the first provisional tax payment is paid after 6 months. And it is based on last assessed income. So you pick up your last tax return, you read off the taxable income on it, and you work out the tax on the current rates on it. If you believe at that point in time that you are not going to make as much as you made last year, you may lower the estimate. And because it's only 6 months into the year, they are quite forgiving about that, if you get it wrong. The risk area is here, the second provisional tax payment. Because by the second provisional tax payment, you are expected, if your income is over $1 million, to get it right. That you have to pay your tax by the end of the tax year. If you do not pay all of your tax and pay catch up by the end of the tax year, there's a massive penalty. Simply, you have to know, and it's one of the quality controls that we have to bring in now with all companies. We can't just wait till the auditors have been there and say, oh, well, 6 months after year end, that's when we used to pay tax, 6 months after year end. Now they're saying you've got to be dead accurate at year end. You've got to be able to estimate your figures and properly calculate your second provisional. If you stuff it up, there's going to be a massive penalty on top of the tax plus interest. So, when we put the system together, we've got to say, please will somebody remember to pay on time? Because late payment incurs a severe penalty. What you've got to know on the board is that there are basically 2 big provisionals a year for tax. Have they been paid on time? The chief financial officer, together with the risk committee, etc., will put in the controls to say, pay on time, please. Very important. Right. So that is a run-through of the tax system. Now, we start talking about tax planning. And we go back to standards of conduct. And we read there, we have to have a rational basis when we claim a tax, a rational basis to doing things. Now, how do you as a director know that you've got a rational basis for claiming a tax deduction? You can't be trained in an MBA. Even if we put a whole module to it, we would only scratch the surface of what this is about. We have to delegate it out of the board. And we have to start looking at what is reasonable. How far can you push the envelope? And we've got to start relying on other people in tax management. Now, forget all the types of trading entities. We've done all of that. Enough, thank you, this morning. We've done that. So we can go past all of this. Am I going in the right direction here, or am I going in the wrong direction? What are my slides doing? Sorry, excuse me. I was going in the wrong direction.
So
now,
is there a difference between provisional tax and QPDs?
QPDs?
Quarterly payment days.
Quarterly payment is something to do with VAT or small business. Provisional tax for a big business that you will be dealing with, we haven't brought in quarterly payment yet. Right. Now somebody comes along with a smart idea. We want to reduce your tax. Okay? Now, your shareholder is going to love you for reducing tax. Why? There's more money for him. There have been times when you've doubled the bottom line or the tax line. So he comes along with a proposal or an explanation about how we can reduce your tax. When do you accept his advice and when don't you? Or do you just say, Jesus, smart ass came through the door and he told me that was the deduction and I swallowed it hook, line and sinker and he turned out to be wrong? No. This is where tax gets incredibly complicated. And it starts with the moralities of tax planning. If you never pay tax, you will go to jail, versus if you pay tax on turnover, you will go insolvent if you never claim a deduction. Right? And we have got to live somewhere on that scale. How far can you push your luck? So, in the old days, Arianassus said there are no rules, and the likes of Trevor Manuel would have liked us to give it all to him. Well, we can't do that. So somewhere between the two, we've got to live. And they are conflicting forces, the forces of good and evil. Right. And there are various stopping points that we are going to analyze in this next discussion. And the very first one starts off with a very old judgment. I think this is 1938. His Majesty's subjects are free, if they can, to arrange their affairs so as to fall outside the taxing acts. Notice I can recite it. I'm in the game. That was the old game. It's like a game of poker. Okay? There is no moral censure if you take the law and you make it your business to work outside the law, to beat the system. You are just a good businessman. That's what it said all those years ago, okay? If you think you're going to get away with that today, strict legal compliance, you're going to get stuffed up. That doesn't apply. So it starts off with the first point in this is what's called an infraudum legis transaction. And this is guidance that we get from 100 years ago. And my God, it's very, very useful in a lot of things that you do in your life. It is a judgment of a famous South African judge called Watermeyer, 1910. And he was dealing with what he calls an infraudum legis transaction. He says, the parties to a transaction endeavor to conceal its real nature. They call it by a name or give it a shape intended not to express but to disguise. Oh, well, we can tell the receiver that one. Okay? We can window dress it like this. And the judge goes on to say, and when a court is asked to decide any rights under such agreement, it can only do so by giving effect to what the transaction really is, not what form it purports to be. Now that's not substance over form. That's something else. That is a Latin maxim. Plus vale quod agetur quam quod simulate concepita. Is anybody in here got the slightest idea how to translate that? It means bullshitting not allowed. You can't window dress. If you window dress, okay, if you dress up your transactions to give a false impression of what they are, we will set them back to what they are in reality. And then we will assess the tax consequences from there. Take away the disguise, is what it means. And that I find so important in everything in governance. That Latin maxim, cut the bullshit. What did you really agree between the parties? And when you get to what is really agreed between the parties, well, then the tax consequences roll out from there anyway, because you've taken the disguise away. And I look at a lot of that stuff, I think it's a very useful guidance. This was taken further, more recently, 100 years later, by a junior judge of the SCA, Carol Lewis. Notice it's JA. Okay, not a full judge of appeal yet, I don't think, in that case. She says that test should go further. She said, what you do in this is we must look into the real substance of the matter. And if the purpose is only to save tax, well then that's it. It's a simulated transaction, get stuffed. Whereas Watermeyer was saying, we just go into this thing and look at what the true transaction is. She's going into the purpose of it. If it's to reduce tax, then it's simulated. The mere fact that people perform in terms of a contract and it is not simulated does not mean that we must give credence to what they're doing. Now, the Lewis judgment basically comes to this conclusion. If the purpose of a transaction is only to achieve an object that allows for tax evasion, then it is a simulation. What does that show you? That shows you that in a tax matter, the courts favor SARS. Okay? They've got to preserve the fiscus. So when somebody comes into a board meeting and says, every taxpayer is due his day in court, that old line, you say, wait, be careful, you are playing against a staked deck. The onus is on the taxpayer, and the judge will not be sympathetic. Now, we then bring in the next one, which is the whole idea of going to substance over form. Now, people use this doctrine of substance over form far too loosely. And funny enough, in tax terms, it says, we don't like this. This is nothing more than substituting the crooked cord of discretion for the golden and straight meter wand of the law. So when a SARS official says to me, I know the substance over form of this transaction, I throw that at him. You're making it up as you go along. Apply the law. You can't just say, oh, I think it means this. Apply the law, please, to the true transaction. So substance over form doesn't have a lot to do with it. But then we have legislated substance over form. The important thing that we look at is that a lot of these judgments are old, and since these judgments we have a new provision called the General Anti-Avoidance Regulations of Tax in Section 80 of the Income Tax Act, and what's important is that they have never been tried yet in court. They are just a fence there that nobody dares to cross. And we have to be very careful about them and how they work and how the whole thing pans out from there. That's more relevant, is that you get to legislated governance in tax, which sits in Section 80 of the Income Tax Act. I think it's time to break for lunch. See you at 3. Now where we'll go at 3, I think we'll go one long session from 3 o'clock till about 4:30. The rest is for your presentations and preparation for tomorrow, then we can kill it off tomorrow. Okay. So we'll be done here at lectures today at about 4:30. You've had a long session in class.